Welcome back to the show. Remember to keep your comments coming in. The president will be making his final State of the Nation address this week, Wednesday. And all week here on KTN News, we'll be taking a look at various aspects of his administration. We'll be taking a look at economy, the health, the state of corruption, infrastructure, among many other issues in the country. So tonight on Checkpoint, we're kicking that off and we're taking a look at the war on corruption. It's definitely been a big issue, a big thorn in the flesh for the government. And you will remember during that State of the Nation address in 2015, he released that list of, now known as the list of shame. And we saw a lot of cascading effects from that. We've also seen some frustration expressed by the president himself. So we want to speak about this issue and sort of interrogate that for you. So the question we're asking you today is, has President Uhuru Kenyatta been successful in the war on corruption during his tenure? Please send in your thoughts at KTN News, at Yvonne Okwara. The hashtag is Checkpoint. That's how I'll be tracking your feedback. Oh, you can also use SMS. The number is 22155, and that is absolutely free. So my guest tonight, as we introduce them before the break, I'll do that one more time. We've got Senator Kembi Gitura. Thank you very much for making it on the show. He's also the Deputy Speaker of the Senate and Senator for Murang'a. And we also have Honorable Abdikadir Aden, who's the Member of Parliament for Balambala, and Dr. Alex Sawiti, who's the Director of the East African Institute at the Aga Khan University and a regular analyst with us here. Thank you all for making the time. Senator, let's start with you. Obviously, how would you rate, the president's war on corruption from 2013 up until this moment? We're going into an election. Much has happened. Many scandals have come out. What would you say has been the hallmark of this fight?
Well, thank you very much. That's a big question. I heard you say that the president is making his final State of the Nation address on Wednesday.
Before the election, yeah.
I think it's good to clarify and say that he is making his final State of the Nation address in his first term. He will make a similar address at the beginning of the first year of his first term next year. So I think it's important.
We shall wait and see.
I think it's important to make that clarification.
I think the voters will decide. But
that's
anyway,
right.
Yeah.
But you made an important question, which is how successful has been the president's fight on corruption? And the reason I say it's an interesting question is because everybody seems to think that the fight against corruption is the president's fight. It isn't. It is a fight by all of us, because all of us must take part and all of us must take a very serious part in the fight against corruption. The president has a role to play in that, and I would say he's done what he could have done in the circumstances, because he's brought out the names of the people, some of them very close to him, that he made to step aside because of the corruption allegations against them. And he's not taken them back to his cabinet. He has not taken anybody back to his cabinet, since that list of shame. But then you must remember that we are operating under very different circumstances, under a new constitution, which quite clearly sets out the various independent bodies of this government and the work that they have to do. We have independent commissions. We can immediately talk about the EACC. We can talk about the courts. And you can even talk about the DCI, the Director of Criminal Investigations. All these are extremely independent people. And the president can recommend or give names to them because he is satisfied that there are corrupt practices against certain people because of the evidence that is there. But once he's done that, like he did in 2015 in the State of Nation address that he did, and he gave out so many names of people that were suspected to have been involved in corrupt practices, he did what he had to do. But he gave directions to the independent commissions and bodies in the government. What has happened? I don't know why people continue to blame the president about these things, because people must start by appreciating that on 27th of August 2010, we had a new constitution, and it said that you cannot interfere with the work of these people. So sometimes I think we expect too much from the president. We expect him to break the constitution so that he can be seen to be the president. We expect him to do certain things. But every time a lot of these matters have gone to court, for instance, you've seen the courts reversing what the president has directed. You've seen Parliament itself reversing the presidential appointments. You've seen matters going to the DPP and him saying there is not sufficient evidence to charge this person. I think sometimes you expect too much from a president in the current constitutional dispensation.
All right. Mheshimiwa?
I think I beg to differ with Senator. My view is the president is the head of the executive. Ultimately, he takes responsibility for corruption and failures within the executive. The unfortunate thing is that despite all the naming and shaming of names and removing of cabinet secretaries, the truth of the matter is corruption continues to happen in the executive. And this is where we have a challenge with. And he is the head of the executive. And I think that's where the biggest challenge comes in. Why is it that time and again we see the president talking tough about corruption, talking about zero tolerance on corruption, yet year on year, these things continue to happen. I sit in the Public Accounts Committee, and I can tell you, all the financial years that we've looked at, including the one we're looking at now, which was just last year's, 2014-15, serious failures in different ministries and different departments. So really, taking a shot at the big names out there, the ministers, for example, who we can dismiss, is not necessarily where the solution is going to come from.
What more do you think the president could have done? Because you're saying he's the head of the executive,
yes,
granted.
Yes.
What more do you think he could have done?
What I think is that, unlike you and I, the president enjoys the privilege of knowing a lot more details on issues, on people, on exactly what is happening. I am sure that he is well informed where he is through the intelligence briefs that he gets, that where exactly corruption is occurring and the points where they are. Unfortunately, some of this corruption leads to big offices. And we will be very surprised to see how comes the president will not be in the know. And these are questions that we put as a Public Accounts Committee to the agencies that are expected to inform the head of the executive, asking him, do you really give accurate information on these issues? How comes you are the NIS, for example, and you want to tell us that you don't know what is happening and who's looting the public coffers? These things happen through financial institutions, from ministries to either private accounts or of companies or individuals. People make calls and people communicate and travel and do all sorts of things to enable money laundering and corruption. All this is issues that I cannot personally say that the president will not know.
I don't think that's
he must be in the know, and if he is, then he must take the appropriate action. You see, it is about making sure that you create systems, you perfect systems.
Okay.
You remove this minister, but the same rod continues to stay in the same ministry.
All right.
So what have you done?
Now that you're talking about systems, and we'll come to Dr. Awiti in just a moment. Now that you're talking about systems, well, some would say that the president has made an attempt to do that. The Bribery Act 2016 was passed. There's the multi-agency task force that he put together. There's the Asset Recovery Agency, which has succeeded in getting us that money back from Jersey. And some say that all of these then contribute to the fight against corruption, and that is making an attempt at strengthening institutions and processes.
Yeah, you see, I agree with you that there are a few things that have been done that, in fact, not few, very many things. The multi-agency task force, the asset recovery, all of which we've had an engagement with as a Public Accounts Committee. But sometimes some of these institutions are themselves in conflict of the other. One is looking for what the other is probably not looking at. And one tells you that, I can only go so far and recommend prosecution, and prosecution is either not being done. And the prosecution side will tell you, look, I can't prosecute without, a clear proof of evidence so that I...
But that was what the multi-agency task force was supposed to cure, that everybody is talking to everyone. So is it your statement that it's not
Unfortunately,
successful?
it has not been, it's not successful. If it were, then, the corruptions that we continue to see till this day in the executive will not have continued to be.
All right. Dr. Awiti, how do we rate success? Mheshimiwa says, well, he doesn't see much of that. There seems to be a lot of strengthening of systems, but corruption continues. I mean, a lot of the Kenyans that are tweeting are saying we don't see anything. People are baying for blood. People want convictions. How would you rate that? And do you think that's the only yardstick towards success in the war on corruption?
I think what is deeply frustrating about these conversations is the national hypocrisy around these issues. The lifeblood of politics and business in this country is corruption, period. You gentlemen sitting here, sit in institutions that have members have been involved in this whole graft within government. You know, the NYS scandal, for instance, the members of the Senate who have been named in this. In the tendering process in NYS and various other government agencies, members of parliament have been named. The Public Accounts Committee has had upheaval. Babu Nawamba is no more, under a catastrophic thunderstorm of allegations of graft. Now, the public itself, 30% of young Kenyans believe that it is profitable to give or take a bribe.
40%.
That's a survey that we did.
Kenyans.
So it is a pervasive problem in this country. And right now, in the counties that is far away from the limelight, there is insane amounts of corruption. Governors instantly have become millionaires, flying choppers that they own. So I think, first of all, it's a fundamental failure of citizenship in this country. Yes. Not even leadership. No, citizenship that is basically surrendered its responsibility of being actively engaged in the matters of governance. The other one is that it is extremely problematic that somebody would imagine that you set up a different commission to deal with issues of graft when this is just theft. These are thieves. Why do we create an anti-corruption commission to deal with these things? There are enough legal processes and procedures in our criminal code everywhere you turn. Why are we wasting public money creating these institutions that are basically toothless? So I think, in my view, there is a fundamental level of accountability that lies at the foot of the president. He has to lead differently on this matter. So while there are considerable constraints to his power, given the new constitution, but I think Mr. Kenyatta should bring some new imagination and some new thinking in the way that we create and coordinate our various institutions to deal with this. This, to me, is what I would expect from him. But I don't expect him, you know, it was a very high bar. You know, it was pretty insane for him to say that he might even deal with this thing, because the public really loves corruption. I might even say that you could cause the economy of this country to shrink by about 1% if you dealt definitively with graft, because you will starve this economy of private resources for investment. A lot of that comes from corruption.
But the question that I got to be asked was this: what has the president done and what can he do about it? And I think that's an important question. I do not think anybody sitting here or anywhere in the Republic can pretend that there is no corruption in this country. There is a lot of corruption, and it is rampant, and something has to be done about it. And the thinking of the new constitution, when it created all these institutions, was that this would be an easier way of removing the power from the center, so that there is no protectionism, and issues of corruption and those are kind of issues can be dealt with at that devolved level. But the truth of the matter, like Dr. Awiti says, is that corruption has been devolved to the counties. And we have an anti-corruption commission, for instance. The law provides clearly that there should be lifestyle audits on anybody. And this should be done and can be done at random. When you talk about the NYS, for instance, and what Parliament has done about it, when you talk about corruption within Parliament itself, who is supposed to deal with it? How can the president control Parliament, which is an independent institution? It should have its own mechanisms. And these are national mechanisms where people are arrested and they are taken to a court of law after investigation. But then what control does the president have on the judiciary? The days are finished, and I would like to say this clearly. The days are finished when the president could pick a phone and call the Chief Justice or a judge dealing with a matter and tell him, I want that person jailed for 7 years, or I want so-and-so detained. Those days are gone. But look at an issue, for instance, about these audits, lifestyle audits. What is so difficult about the EACC picking a person like Kembi Getora and telling them, the same way the KRA does an in-depth on a person, tell you we want to do at random, you know, a lifestyle audit on you. I want to know, as you put it so collective on, I want to know, how is it that now you have a helicopter and 2 years ago you are a pauper?
Okay, Senator, let's address a little bit of what Mheshimiwa was talking about in terms of, you know, the war on graft, and some cabinet secretaries were, you know, sent home after that now very famous list of shame. But then you're starting to see a number of those individuals now getting into politics and now running on the Jubilee Party, which the president, by the way, is a party leader of the Jubilee Party, and in a place that he probably has considerable influence. we would imagine. Yet we see a number of these individuals now wanting to run on a Jubilee Party ticket, people that he supposedly purged because of the scourge of corruption. And then some say, you know, it's speaking from both ends of the mouth.
But you see now, if for instance, Jubilee Party, the party that I subscribe to myself, rejected somebody who wants to run on Jubilee ticket because of suspicions, that person will go to court. And I want to tell you...
But the people, the president asked those people on suspicion to step aside.
It is true because he had evidence, but he gave them out to another institution to deal with that evidence. A lot of these issues are still pending. We are still hoping that we are going to get results. But like I said earlier, and you can take this to the bank, the president cannot possibly now call the Chief Justice and tell him, I want you to jail so-and-so.
Okay, but the president can say, we will be intolerant of corruption within our party.
I'm sure a lot of us are intolerant about corruption. But the problem we have is all this multifaceted way of doing things, right? And if given the issue, the example, for instance, of the Jubilee Party, you see the president, you can say, you are trying to say that the president is tolerating corrupt people whom he sacked and still are coming back to want to be vetted and become Jubilee aspirants. You see, what can he do? Because if he cannot tell them, do not clear so-and-so, because if they do, and you've seen it already happening, if somebody is not cleared, they go to court. If the court grants you an injunction, what can you do? What can the president do? What can the party do? So it's an indictment against the whole of society, and I think Dr. Awiti put it very well. It's that people have come to glorify corruption. People think it is good to be corrupt. And that's why you find 40% of our own youth, people under 30, saying that they will do anything to get rich, even if it means using corruption or other such as thing. So the indictment is actually quite big, and we might be dealing with these issues superficially. We need to deal with the endemic, cause of all these problems.
But if I might just say, if I might just add, I think part of it, and people like you who have a big voice, I think we need to expand this conversation beyond just a focus on government.
Exactly.
There is insane amounts of corruption in the private sector. You know, Safaricom, for instance, the banks, I have friends there. There are a lot of insane things happening there. And a lot of that corruption, because of government procurement, is actually instigated from the private sector, because there is somebody who's willing to give, and therefore you corrupt these government people. So I think we need, and even in the churches, so every aspect of our lives has been touched by this scourge. So I think that we need to broaden the conversation beyond just public sector corruption to look at various other elements.
Does the war on corruption then need a crusader? Somebody that leads the charge and leads the fight. And many people say that is the president, and that he has perhaps in some respects not done that as he should. Yes, it is everybody that is corrupt, but ultimately somebody has to take leadership of that and say, this is the direction in which we're going. Some say the president hasn't done that. Abdikadir, has he? And is there somebody else? Because people look to the opposition and say, well, we don't see that person either.
Well, let me say this way, Yvonne. My view on avoiding corruption or bringing corruption to an end is that there is a possibility to do that. You know, corruption, if you look at it, looting of the government funds comes through a process, starting from the procurement process at certain ministry level all the way until it gets to a bottleneck whereby there's one or two people who have to press a button called the GPay system that pays you, that pays the corrupt person. The infrastructure is there. But the problem is that right from the person seated in that particular position, because central bank is a bank that is required, that is supposed to be, the regulator of other banks. If you look at the NYS issue, and I don't want to go into details on this because it's a live investigation still within Parliament, but I'll tell you, there is no way that institution like central bank, for example, can walk away from this. Because you want to say that you have remitted money to the other banks, you want to blame the banks, and we don't blame you. The government system has been created in such a way that everything in terms of government payment, right at the end, has been brought to a bottleneck so that somebody can be able to control. Can the president do something about it? I think he can.
What?
What he can do is that he can make sure that the right people are in the right places at the central bank. And if such a things happen, then the people who are there, who are part of the executive, should be held responsible for this.
But you are the ones who vet these people in Parliament.
No, look, vetting of these people when they come in cannot be an excuse to say that they should not be oversighted on. You know, Senator,
but the oversight is still done by Parliament.
No, that is true. That is true. That is true. But the executive is supposed to control. You know, there is control. Unfortunately, a lot of the oversight role of Parliament, things like public accounts, is more of a postmortem when corruption has already happened, unfortunately. But the point I want to make is that you asked a question, can somebody else do it? I think, yes, we can. I think it just requires a commitment right from the top to say that corruption ends today. Because there is more money looted.
And you believe that any one of the NASA leaders who will be chosen to be the flag bearer,
I believe so, yes,
will be able to do that, and has proven beyond doubt.
I have personally worked very closely with my party leader, Raila Odinga, and I understand, and I know his vision very well. And I can tell you that I can confirm that he is going to have a zero tolerance policy on corruption, and it's going to work.
But you see, the problem I see with that is that we cannot pretend that we are not working under the current constitution that we are working on. And none of the people running on whatever party ticket are running have not been in government for very many years. So I do not know what is going to be reinvented when you say that there's going to be zero. There has always been zero tolerance to corruption in this country.
Has there?
I mean, that is what we are... No, listen, I'm saying we have always been told there's zero tolerance to corruption. Whether it is true is a different, an argument for another day. But the issue I'm taking with my friend and colleague Abdikadir Aden here is that when he talks to us about people coming in to bring a fresh air, they're the same people. They have been there for very many years.
President Uhuru Kenyatta has also been there for very many years. So was even in the so-called Nusum Kate government.
And he's been there. So when somebody tells me somebody else is going to bring in a fresh breath in the whole system, people who have been there for more than 100 years, I mean, cumulatively, then it becomes to me like a joke.
So then
I think I'll go back to where Dr.
No
Awiti
fresh
stopped.
thinking into this, because even the president and the deputy have all been
There's a lot
in government before.
Let me finish by saying this. I'll go back to where Dr. Awiti stopped. You know, we assume that corruption is something to do with the government only. Yeah? First of all, government doesn't do business. It's the private sector that does business with the government in procurement and what have you. I think we must start from that point. The point Dr. Awiti made, and I think this is the underlining point, is that we are having a very serious social problem.
So Senator, who changes the social...
Us, you and I.
And how do we do that?
Because we have...
Should somebody lead that charge?
Yes, exactly. We have EACC, and that is the institution that should be leading the charge against corruption.
Is it?
And it should not be dithering like it seems to do. And it should not be telling us about handles. We have not seen a single person convicted of corruption in this country for a very long time. And corruption is happening every day. We have not had a single person, we have not had a single lifestyle audit done against a single person, and you don't have to be told by anybody. When you see governors, when you see people, public officers, suddenly showing so much wealth and
Senator,
still nothing is happening, then there's a problem.
Because this is a legacy of President Uhuru Kenyatta when he came in and talked about empowerment for women and youth and 30% of the tenders in government. And then even there we have seen corruption. We've seen people talking about how much money in millions they're carrying in gunny bags. And some say that in fact this AGPO has created another type of corruption, which is tenderpreneurship. This is the president's personal legacy, a promise that he made, and that now is in itself mired in corruption. So what would you say to that? Why hasn't he taken special attention to this issue? And why do we see now people, some of them whom allegedly are even close to him himself, now getting involved in tenders and that sort of thing?
You see, most of this corruption is happening in the county governments.
No, I'm speaking specifically with respect to what's happening at the national government.
Even
the tendering,
even
NYS, the Afia House scandal.
True.
I mean, it's touched quite a number of people.
That's
it's
true.
a live wire. But let's speak about at the national level, which is where the president, remains supreme.
I go back to where I started. That the trouble, and I'm not defending or holding brief for anybody, because I stand personally against corruption in whatever nature it takes. But the point I'm making is this, that we sometimes expect too much from the person called the president in how much he can do. Some of you may not remember, and maybe some of you remember, there was a time when the president could order you to be detained. And that's it. End of story. And then you disappear incarcerated. There was a time when the president could say, do this to so and so and so and so. But now we have an independent judiciary. What happens in the judiciary? I don't know. I haven't practiced law in the courts for a very long time now. But what happens in the judiciary determines a lot about what would then happen about these issues that we discuss of corruption.
Do you think that the new constitution is restricting the president in terms of what he can achieve?
It is indeed, because we have a constitution.
What would you change to give him more powers?
We cannot go back now. We cannot go back to the centralist system of government. I think we have moved on. We're not going back there. What we need to do, in my opinion, my very considered opinion, is to strengthen the institutions that we have, even as they're independent, make them very, very strong institutions. And once we have strong institutions, each institution can be able to stand alone and say this is what's going to be done. Because the DPP, for instance, is a very, very powerful office. Very powerful office. If the EACC sends a file to the DPP, and the DPP's office, for the sake of argument, I'm not saying this is what's happening, is compromised, then every work done by the EACC is for nothing. If the DPP gets a closed file and takes it to the judiciary, and the judiciary is again compromised, then it's for nothing.
So I think it's a question at the parliamentary level, would it not?
I think you see what happens is that I think what will happen is that we don't need to necessarily say that we're going back to a powerful presidency that's going to be a solution to corruption. I don't think that will be. The reason being, the biggest corruption is happening at the national government level. This is where the presidency has a direct control over it. This is where the challenge is. My worry is that looking at the Moi regime and the Kibaki regime and now the Uhuru regime, corruption came from rampancy to occurrences, though major, during Kibaki time, but clearly coming under control. But again, we're going to full-blown rampancy in terms of corruption, happening literally almost everywhere. And this is where my biggest challenge is. This is why we don't have money to pay doctors, for example. This is why we don't have money to pay our lecturers, for example. This is why our economy is going down the drain. There is corruption literally even when the government is making the people believe that it's going for a noble action, such as borrowing from abroad. There is unfortunate, and the definition of corruption is wide. Misuse of the public funds. And it is exactly what is happening. Unfortunately, the country continues to sink into more and more debts, not because there's heavy investment in infrastructure, but because there is more rampancy in terms of corruption.
Okay.
That is where my worry is, and that is where I think somebody at the top needs to. Let me be honest with you. When President Uhuru came into office, and when he made his first speech to us in Parliament, I was very optimistic. Knowing his background and how he was brought up and, all this, will there be any appetite for him to steal? I don't think so. I don't even think at personal level he is now, I wouldn't say he's stealing. But unfortunately, he appears to be saying more tough words than actions that is coming through his whatever. This is a guy who can issue presidential directive that can radically reform the national government infrastructure and institutions. It is not happening.
Okay. Dr. Witi, Senator is talking about, there's only so much the president can do, and in terms of strengthening a number of these organizations that fight that. But some would say that the president has an opportunity that he has missed. For example, he has the tyranny of numbers in Parliament and can sort of push for a number of these legislations to strengthen these parties, and that in some sense, do you agree with Senator that he's helpless in a sense?
I think there are many levels of collective failure of leadership. If you look at both houses, for instance, with Jubilee and its numbers, I think oversight has not been robust. It has not been effective. I think a lot of these individuals who are in the higher levels of government who are corrupt. The Senate, both Senate and Parliament have jurisdiction over those through the various committees to summon them and to speak with them. As Honorable Senator said, the vetting process, the individuals that we get into some of these institutions, if they're suspect, then fingers should point directly at Parliament. What was that process of vetting and clearing these individuals? And I think strengthening institutions is one thing, and we talk about this all the time. Tell me what the judiciary lacks. Tell me what the Anti-Corruption Commission lacks. What is it that they lack? In my view, the only thing they lack is leadership and a resolve to tackle this vice of corruption. Yeah. This is not Uhuru's problem. This is our problem to as citizens.
And so you're saying Parliament has a role to play.
Parliament has a huge role.
Mheshimiwa, where you sit in the national legislature, a lot of questions about vetting, even with Philip Kinisu, that Parliament itself failed to see this so-called conflict of interest between his company and its dealings with NYS, and that in that respect, surely the president can't have sat there during the vetting and said, okay, you know, make sure there's due diligence here. But some say that Parliament itself, which, you know, is composed of members from, you know, both sides of the political divide,
tell you, Yvonne,
failed in that mandate.
Where we will take responsibility as Parliament is, unfortunately, the tyranny of numbers has not been helpful. Let me just say it so. But it is not just an excuse to throw everything at Parliament.
But in these vetting committees, surely,
let me tell you,
they're bipartisan.
Yvonne, let me tell you, the name is being referred to Parliament. By who? By
Parliament
who?
can reject it.
But hold on, by the presidency. That person should have been vetted by the national... You want to tell me that the NIS did not know, and this is where I'm talking about institutions that we have.
Organizations in Parliament, the vetting committees do receive some of these reports from the NIS and can request
I don't sit in the vetting committee, and I wouldn't tell you whether we did receive or did not receive about the intelligence report, and I doubt we will. But what I have an issue with is that why will that person... No, you wouldn't be given.
But
you don't enjoy the privilege.
But here's the
you don't have the right to be given intelligence briefs.
Here's the
There's
interesting
limits
thing,
to who is to be given intelligence briefs.
Because Philip Kinisu himself did raise the issue of his dealings with NYS.
Yes.
And parliamentarians completely missed that.
Yeah.
And so that there must be some responsibility taken by the National Assembly. Let's keep vetting aside. But the Parliamentary Accounts Committee, of which you are a part, of course, the predecessor, which is traditionally headed by the opposition, was mired in scandal. Sharing of billions of shillings, allegations of that, it was back and forth. Surely, even at that point, this body that is set to oversight the executive also failing in its mandate, and so there's quite a bit of mud to throw around.
I am not in any way attempting to defend corruption in any place. There is corruption, and I agree. There is corruption, alleged corruption, in Parliament, not just in one or two committees that were disbanded in the past, but even in the institution itself as Parliament, as in the past. We have seen reports on the EACC. What I want to say is that the issue of Parliament and the issue of Kinisu, for example, that name is brought. You know that this is a name driven by Jubilee. Jubilee has a tyranny of numbers in the committees, on the floor of the House. There is nothing much that you can do about that issue.
But you can still come back to the people and say, here is a problem.
Let me tell you, go and listen back to the Hansard debates on those issues. Some of these issues have been brought up on the floor of the House, on those individuals.
You know,
but at the end of the day, it goes to a vote, and the tyranny of numbers comes.
Mheshimiwa, you're sounding a bit like Senator who says, you know, there's only so much the president can do. You seem to be saying the same thing. There's only so much Parliament can do.
Parliament's failure in this term is the issue of the tyranny of numbers.
No.
There are a lot of very infamous things that have happened and even legislations, very, very controversial legislations, some of which attempted to control even our media freedom, as you will remember. And many of those draconian laws, they pass through Parliament. Why? Because of the tyranny of numbers. So some of these failures that you are contributing to Parliament or National Assembly, for that matter, or even both houses as Parliament, is largely to do with the so-called the tyranny of numbers. It's been one of the problems.
I don't think so, Yvonne, because we have the judiciary. And if Abdikadir Aden is not satisfied that the law is proper, but it has gone through because of tyranny of numbers, there is nothing to stop him or anybody else, a citizen, to petition Parliament or to petition the Supreme Court and to have that law reversed.
We've done that
and
many
a lot
times.
of laws, some laws have been taken to the courts and have been, the courts have said they are not proper laws. So it is what Abdulkadir is saying is not right. We have good and sufficient laws in this country. That I can tell you. Very good and sufficient laws on corruption, on vetting, on everything. But there is a lot of time there is no will in the relevant institutions. And here I must go back to the word institutions, because there is nothing that is not provided for in the law. And everybody knows what they should be doing. The Public Accounts Committee knows exactly what it should be doing.
Okay.
And you've raised a very important issue about what has happened to the National Assembly Parliamentary Committee on Public Accounts Committee over the last few years. And that is a committee that is traditionally chaired by the opposition.
All right.
So the issue of tyranny of numbers here doesn't arise at all.
I'm sorry to cut you short, because I'd like us to do our closing statements now as we've come to the end of this. Senator, I want to start with you in terms of where do we see ourselves? I mean, you can say a lot about what the president has done. Kenyans are seeing scandal after scandal. I mean, for sure, there have been quite a number, big, explosive. The president himself at the start of his administration said it goes right up until the office of the president in his backyard.
Yes.
What would be different should he get a 5-year term? Would we finally get to see convictions? And would Kenyans be happy? Because at this point in time, some of them aren't too happy with what they see.
At the risk of repeating myself, let me say that the president cannot organize for convictions, right? I think we have a bigger problem as a nation. And I think we need to go back. When we went to Bombers 1 in 2003, and then the referendum that came up in 2010, one of the chapters that was very contested and that everybody fought for was on national values, right? National values. And I think we need to go, it may look simplistic, but I think we need to go back there. Because when you find our young men and women below the age of 30 saying that they are willing to engage in corruption at whatever cost so they can become wealthy, then there's a very big problem. And it's because they were not taught national values, right from kindergarten. Right from, a lot of kids cannot sing the whole of the national anthem and understand it.
It could be because of impunity as well, Senator.
No.
That they see people getting away with it.
Personally, my own thinking is this. You may think it is simple or simplistic, but I think the reason we put the chapter on national values in our constitution was because we realized that something was going very wrong. We are going to elections now, and technically, a lot of people should be stopped from being allowed to run in the national elections because they do not fit the bill in Chapter 6 of our Constitution, national values. Sadly, you are going to find that even if they are stopped at the party level or even at the IEBC level, they are going to go to court and they are going to get orders, some orders even stopping the elections, general elections, because an individual is not satisfied, that is not qualified.
So national values?
So I think national values are very important.
All right.
And I think we must also accept and not push it under the carpet that corruption in this country is rampant.
Okay.
And we should not push the back. We should not pretend it is not there. But when it keeps saying it is the president or it's whoever, it's who of you, I want to push this problem where it lies. And I think it lies also in the institutions that we, in good faith, entrusted with dealing with these issues when we had the Constitution in 2010.
Thank you, Senator. Mheshimiwa?
My take, Yvonne, is that Jubilee as a government has failed to bring corruption under control. It's a fact. Corruption is now rampant, as the Senator agrees. And unfortunately, we cannot have a country that accepts right at the top. The president says, what can I do about it? It shows loss of conviction, loss of ability to control corruption right at the top. And that is what the Jubilee government has offered. What has it resulted in? 5 billion shilling looting at Afia House, doctors on the streets, patients and Kenyans dying. That is corruption in its life, in its real way in Jubilee, under Jubilee government. To Kenyans, this is the opportunity. That's why we have elections now in August. I can assure you that one of the principles of for us as a coalition, when we come to power, is fighting corruption head-on, straight from day one. And I can assure you that that is the way to go. This is the opportunity that Kenyans now have to be able now to say enough is enough. We are fed up with a regime that has said it cannot bring corruption to an end. Okay. And so when they go to the polls on the 8th, then I think the rightful thing to do is to bring in the alternative government. That's what happens in the rest of the world. That is how corruption is fought. Finally, the public service. It is where the problem lies. And it is because the public service is very demoralized. There is lack of meritocracy in the public service. Unfortunately, you have very junior people who are forced or pushed in upper ladders in the public service, leaving, you know, veterans, people who have served in the public service for very many years. Okay. So there's a kind of a don't care attitude. All right. So what we will do as NASA is to reform that public service and revamp and bring that motivation up.
You are now using this platform to campaign.
No, it's not campaign. I'm just pointing out what we will do against corruption.
All right, great. Thank you, Mheshimiwa. Daktari?
So I think, Yvonne, in closing, while the president is constrained in the new constitutional dispensation and that power has been distributed across different institutions in the Republic, I think that Mr. Kenyatta has been a reluctant warrior. He has failed to summon national outreach against corruption. There must be leadership. You talked about that figure, that inspirational figure at the top, who basically breathes and speaks zero tolerance on corruption. That emblematic leadership has been lacking. While we understand the various constraints, but I think in many instances, when he's gone out and said, what can I do? When he said the thieves inside my backyard and done nothing after that, I think that's an indictment on his reluctance to lead that process. He might be constrained. From where he sits, he probably sees more things than we do. But even for him to say, when he was speaking at the police cooperative thing and said, well, wacha watu wajiendeleze, allowing policemen to engage in business, which in many ways conflict with the code of conduct. That in many ways opens the door for the police. I think basically to let IPOA do what it does. Now IPOA has introduced a new set of rules that actually prohibit the police from doing business. Let these institutions run without the president interfering with those things. Let him not make these statements that could be misleading. I'm sure his intentions were right. A policeman has a right to run a business, but when that business includes matatu, it includes the things that they're supposed to be supervising, that's a problem. So going forward, I think we need to broaden the war on corruption and we need to enlist the young generation in this country because those numbers are pretty worrying. What can we do with churches? What can we do at home as parents? What can we do in our schools? And as the Senator said, there's a values section, Section 6 of the Constitution. I think that there has to be demonstration of those values at by the political class and the business class, so that the young people begin to see the role models. Where are the role models? Right. In the absence of that, it is very difficult to say one thing and expect the rest of the citizens to do something else.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr.
But
Alex.
are we through?
Here we are.
Because I was just
closing statements. Please, I'm so sorry, we're out of time, Senator. I would really like to. We can definitely discuss this again. No problem. I'm really sorry I have to cut you off, Dr. Alex Awiti, Honorable Abdikadir Aden, and Senator Kembi Gitura. On that, please continue to give us your feedback, whether you think the president has been successful in leading the charge against corruption.